It is a name familiar to those of you who have seen this show in the past. That is Mailee Smith of Illinois Policy, illinoispolicy.org. And Mailee, if you're here, that means one thing and one thing only. The Chicago teachers have gone on strike. So can you update us on the status of where we sit right now, heading into the weekend and everything that's going on?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So as you said, Chicago Teachers Union, which is an affiliate of the American Federation of Teachers, did go on strike. They've been on strike since Thursday, the 17th. And as we are in the weekend, we don't have a projected timeline for when kids will be back in school. We don't know what will happen on Monday. You know, I know that the Chicago Public Schools, that they have been discussing and trying to get negotiations to continue. But the Chicago Teachers Union has really been entrenched in their political demands. And you know, this strike really is all about political power. And that's in the union's own words. The AFT president, Randy Weingarten, was in town on Monday, and her quote was, we're about to teach the mayor a new lesson. We're about to teach the new mayor a lesson. And in the media, it's been widely speculated across Chicago media that this is about politics. And what we're seeing, it demonstrates that what we're seeing is a new type of teacher strike, new type of demand. They're striking over politics as opposed to those economic issues that we typically associate with collective bargaining.
And to that point, Mailee, when we look at this, you know, we've talked enough about some of the details, but the latest proposal I've seen has been the 16% raise over 5 years. And we've seen a lot of the demands of the Chicago Teachers Union, at least on the economic side, totally met. Like they're not even saying that right. That's not something they want. So my question to you is, sure. Has there been a legal challenge? Should there be a legal challenge to this strike if it goes on beyond this weekend?
That certainly could be a viable action. There are some strikes that are illegal, and it's an illegal strike if they go out over certain subjects. And some of the things that CTU is on strike or claiming to be on strike about are staffing issues. They want more staff, like over 4,000 new staff members. They're asking for the creation of new community schools. They are asking for the board at Chicago Public Schools to advocate or lobby on behalf of certain subjects, like certain taxes and things like that. So those are typically things that are outside the scope of collective bargaining. There are things that Chicago Public Schools could negotiate with them over if they wanted, but they don't have to. And because of that, going out on strike over some of these tangential issues could make it an illegal strike. And you know, going back to the fact that this is a new type of strike, you know, they are demanding things, like I said, that are not typical to contract negotiations. And it really shows that not even a progressive mayor, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, so not even a progressive mayor who won an election by wide margins is safe. It demonstrates this massive power that unions have in Illinois and that they're pushing for more.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mayor Lori Lightfoot here. Even on Friday morning, as she went in front of the cameras and talked about what was going down here, you noticed that she was talking about, we have no more money. That's becoming a new refrain for them as this situation unfolds further and further. They're just saying, hey, look, we're doing what we can to give you what you need financially. We just have no more money to do these extra things. So right. As we take a look at this, as the strike goes further and further, how do you see this playing out in terms of the PR war? Who really wins, if you will? Because I have a feeling the further this goes, the less and less the teachers are going to look like the victims in all of this.
Yeah, in terms of PR, we certainly see CTU having less support from the media than they did in past strikes. We've seen the Sun-Times, which largely leans union-friendly, telling the teachers even before the strike to take the deal. And Lori Lightfoot has given them what they've wanted in terms of pay, really more. They were demanding 15% pay raises over 3 years, and she's offering them 16% pay raises over 5 years, and only 1%. An only 1% increase in health insurance premiums over the next 5 years. So she is giving them an incredibly generous deal. And when you compare what the average teacher gets versus what the average Chicago resident earns a year, it really demonstrates that the people that are going to pay the price for this are the residents. They're the parents. If you look at what the typical Chicago owner could see their property tax bill rising by at least $235 next year if CTU's demands were funded through property taxes. You compare that to what Lightfoot is offering, and their property taxes would only increase by about $13. So, this is really going to fall heavily on the residents of Chicago. And like you said, Chicago's not in a position to meet CTU's demands. They already have to borrow on a short-term basis just to meet day-to-day obligations. There's a junk credit rating. CPS's debt has quadrupled since 1998. So there really is no money. When Lightfoot says we don't have money to fund what you're demanding, it's the truth. Chicago doesn't have the money for this, and the residents are going to be the ones who really have the burden of paying for this. They don't have the money for it either.
And you mentioned the truth. Again, we're speaking with Mailee Smith of Illinois Policy, illinoispolicy.org, at Illinois Policy on Twitter. You mentioned the truth. And so I'm going to ask you point blank, what is the truth in all of this matter? When we see that one side is saying that the other side is not negotiating in good faith, I tend to believe that I'm seeing a lot more good faith on behalf of CPS and the mayor than I am from the Chicago's teacher union, just based off of the rhetoric that we're seeing and what people are talking about in terms of the demands that are being placed upon CPS and the taxpayer ultimately. Where do you see the truth in all of this lie?
Sure. I think one of the easiest things to point to is the recommendation that was made by a neutral fact finder in the last couple of months. So CPS and CTU agreed to have a neutral party evaluate the proposals, the demands of both sides. Mm-hmm. And that fact finder based his recommendation on things like the district's financial ability to pay, the present and future general economic conditions, and what he, taking those considerations into factor, he recommended 16% pay raises over 5 years. He recommended a 1% increase in health insurance premiums over the next 5 years. And some of the things that CQ is demanding, like increased staffing, he noted were outside his jurisdiction to decide. The reason that's outside his jurisdiction is because under Illinois state law, it's called a permissive subject of bargaining. CPS doesn't have to bargain over it. So I think if you're looking for the truth, look at that fact finder's report. He was a neutral third party. He came back with a recommendation. That recommendation has been agreed to in full by Lori Lightfoot's administration, and CTU is rejecting it.
And this may come as a shock to you. Not everybody that's listening or watching this show is from Chicago or the greater Illinois state. So I want to bring this idea up to you. For me, I've harped on this for a while. In fact, back in January, before I even had this show, and I was just doing By the Numbers, a 2-minute segment here on Mojo 50 Radio, I kept track of what was going on with the teachers union strike that was happening in Los Angeles. And I'm looking back at that rhetoric. I see a lot of very big similarities to this. So how important do you think it is for people that are not necessarily in Chicago or Illinois to pay attention to what's going on here? Because my theory, my working theory here is that this is what's coming to a town, a village, a city near you during the next few contract negotiations in your town. Because it seems like this is a national thing from the American Federation of Teachers or whatever teachers union on the national level. This seems to be a national fight that they want to bring to municipalities.
That's right. I would totally agree with that. And I would point to, again, the fact that we have a progressive mayor, the first African-American mayor, female mayor in Chicago, who, for all intents and purposes, probably agrees with the majority of CTU members on political issues. Mm-hmm. And if this can happen, if a teachers union can make these outrageous demands and really be a thorn in the side of a progressive mayor in a city like Chicago, then it certainly could happen anywhere in the United States. And, I would also point out that you're not safe either if strikes are illegal in your state. I say this because, in Illinois is a bit of an outlier when it comes to allowing teacher strikes. None of our neighbors, our neighboring states allow teacher strikes, and teacher strikes are illegal in 8 of the top 10 largest school districts. And of course, Chicago is one of those where it is legal. And I mentioned this because just because it's illegal in your state doesn't mean it won't happen. Look at what is happening with CTU. We've already mentioned that some of their demands, like staffing and the increased number of schools, those are things that it is illegal to go on strike over. And yet they're ignoring the legality and going on strike anyway.
And to that point, I think how they're getting around this, and we talked about this earlier, is that they're not saying yes to anything that's on the table, whether that's contractual, monetary issues or anything, because the second that they agree to that specific proposal, the economic side of it is suddenly off the table. They cannot strike. They would not be able to, in my view. But to your larger point here, when we're talking about some of the more contentious issues, and I want people to listen to this, what is one of the, I would say maybe what are the top 3 most outrageous demands that are being made in this negotiation by the teachers union?
Well, I mean, it's hard to narrow it down to 3 because there are so many demands that would be outrageous, I think, to the average person. But a few that come to mind are, one of the demands is that they want the city of Chicago and the Chicago public schools to help new teachers buy homes. They want them to take a stance and assist with affordable housing. They want a moratorium on school closures for the next 10 years. So first of all, 10 years goes beyond the scope of the contract. CPS is wanting a 5-year contract. CTU is wanting a 3-year contract. And CTU is also wanting a 10-year moratorium on the closure of schools. The second thing I would say about that is that is regardless of student population. And we know that student population has been declining. So it doesn't make sense to demand a moratorium on school closings when student population could go down during that time period. And another thing that I already alluded to is that they want, the union wants the public schools, Chicago public schools, to advocate for policies like a millionaire's tax and rent control. So what you see is the union dictating exactly what issues and what stance the Chicago Board of Education is supposed to be taking in legislative type issues.
I mean, those are mind-boggling to the average American, I think. Not surprising when you take a look at the Chicago Teachers Union and the fact that, I mean, this summer they literally went to Venezuela and basically had a propaganda episode for Nicolas Maduro and his wonderful thugs in Venezuela. That's how radical this group is. It wasn't just a small subsect of teachers going there. These were people that were involved with the board of directors, the board of the Chicago Teachers Union. So just keep that in mind, America. But Mailee, as we come out of this weekend, what is your prediction for where this goes next?
Well, as of right now, we have no word on how long this strike will take. But as you mentioned, CTU does not seem to be negotiating. It is not compromising, as opposed to what we're seeing from Chicago public schools. And at this point, there's really no prediction in terms of how long this could last. But what we do know is that it is harmful to the students. We know that academic outcomes are affected by time off of school from strikes. And the longer this goes, the more it's going to harm the students. And that's what the school system is supposed to be all about.
No doubt about it. Well, Mailee, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. How can people follow your work, and what do you have coming down the pipeline for yourself and at Illinois Policy?
Well, right now they can look online at illinoispolicy.org, illinoispolicy.org. That's where they can track our work. We certainly have had a number of blog posts about this strike and other issues, but we are in Illinois, so there are always issues coming down the pipeline. We know, looking forward to 2020, there is going to be a progressive tax hike on the ballot, a constitutional amendment. So that, besides teacher strikes and union issues, that's another issue that we are incredibly involved with and will be watching in the next year.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here, and I'm sure we'll be talking as 2020 unfolds.
Thank you for having me.